Hey everybody, coming to you from Logan, Utah today, and I am going to answer your questions about bikepacking. So thank you for everybody that has asked me a question recently on Instagram or Facebook, and yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. So the first one I am going to address, and I can't really see, so I've got the screenshots of the questions on my computer right next to me, so if I'm looking over here, that's why. And the text is pretty small, so I can't see people's names necessarily. So hopefully that doesn't matter. So somebody asked me, what's the coldest temperature for you for bikepacking and the hottest? So I have done some winter bikepacking. I think the coldest that I have been on a bikepacking trip was in Pakistan, which was this last year in the winter on a bikepacking and pack rafting trip. And it was definitely below freezing on a few nights. I think the coldest that it got, to my knowledge, was about 5 degrees above 0 Fahrenheit. Could have dipped lower than that, but that's the lowest that I know that it got, and that was really cold. The hottest temperature that I bikepacked in was definitely in the Arizona Trail Race in April of 2019, and the first few days of that race, it was up around 100 degrees. Also very, very uncomfortable. But my key for those things, obviously when it's cold, just wearing a lot of layers, making sure that I don't sweat. So really trying to adapt my pacing and be smart about my pacing. So if I'm going too fast and I'm sweating, I slow down, or I, take off layers. So that's super important. And also just keeping moving. So when we got to the top of one of the passes that we were crossing in Pakistan, we were, resting for a little bit, drinking some tea and kind of celebrating making the top of the pass because we've been going like 6 hours pushing our bikes up the pass. But it was really important that we kept moving quickly because both of our feet got pretty cold. So, and then in the heat, kind of my key for being comfortable with that, hi buddy, was to drink electrolytes. So I use Gatorade powder and I put it in my bike bottles or my camelbacks or whatever I'm using. I actually use an Osprey bladder, so a lot of people don't like to put things in their bladder, but for that race I just did because it made the most sense for me. So Gatorade powder, it was like hot and boiling, which is disgusting, but I just kept telling myself I needed to keep sipping the electrolytes, and I was totally fine. So that's that. Okay, next question is how to use the dropper post with a bag underneath. So this is going to be a lot easier to do when you are a taller person with longer legs because you're going to have more clearance between the seat and your tire. So it also depends if you're riding a full suspension or a hardtail, because obviously if you're riding a hardtail, your bike's not going to squish when you go over bumps, and so you're not going to have as many issues with clearance. But even if you're a short person with a full suspension bike, you can still run a seat bag on a dropper post. You just have to find a small one that works for you. So the two that I use on longer trips when I want to carry more in the rear, I use a Rogue Panda Designs prototype that Nick, my buddy who owns Rogue Panda, made me for the AZT last year. And I don't know that he's given it a name yet or is actually selling it yet. It was a prototype for that race that he made for me, and I think he is planning on selling it. But I know that with COVID, he got pretty backed up, so I'm not sure if that's happening yet. But check on his website and see if it's there because it's awesome. The other one that I use is a really tiny little bag from Bedrock Bags based out of Durango, Colorado. And it's actually not meant to be like a seat post bag for bikepacking. It's just something that, you can put anywhere on your bike to keep tools in. It's pretty small. I can do another video where I show all my bags. That is something I want to do soon. But that one I use when I'm doing a shorter race or it's warmer and I don't have to pack as many cold weather layers. What I do with that is if it's really small, obviously I can't put a lot of stuff there, so it doesn't have a lot of capacity, but I put the heaviest stuff back there. So if I'm racing and I need a lot of batteries for my lights because I'm riding at night, I will put my batteries back there and I will put my bike tools back there. If I'm not racing and I don't need a lot of batteries for night lights, I still put my tools back there. And then sometimes I put some other things that are smaller but a little heavier, maybe some first aid kit stuff. Just putting as much weight back there as possible to even out the balance between the rear and the front of the bike, but also making sure that it's not bulky and so it won't expand the bag too big so it won't hit the tire. So you definitely want to make sure, for me, it doesn't matter what bag I use. If I take big hits on my bike, which I like to, go over drops and ride technical features on my bikepacking trips, just like I would normally. And so I put a layer of Gorilla Tape, a very kind of thick layer of Gorilla Tape on the bottom of the little bedrock bag, so that if I do buzz, it doesn't just wear right through the bag and I don't lose all my tools, because that could happen. With the Rogue Panda bag, Nick has a plate, like a plastic, slick plastic plate. I don't know what material he used, but he integrated that into the design of the bag, so that's on the bottom. And so when I do buzz with that bag, I literally don't even know what's happening, because I don't hear it. And it doesn't really affect me. So that's kind of the key to that. You also could use something like a Valet, Valais dropper collar from Wolf Tooth Components. And it's kind of a thick little guy, and it's made so that you can put the strap of your seat post bag around it so it doesn't rub on your stanchion of your dropper post. You can also use it to limit some drops. So for me, I can't use my entire drop. I've got 150 millimeters of drop on one of my bikes, and so I can't use that entire drop when I'm bikepacking. So that collar can also help limit the amount of drop, so I can still use what I can, but it doesn't drop all the way and smash my bag into my tire. If you don't have one of those, or you don't need one of those to limit your dropper, you don't actually have to use one to put your attachment around the stanchion. But if you don't, just make sure that the attachment that's on the bag is really soft, so it doesn't scratch your stanchion. You can put a little piece of a rag in between, and you just want to make sure that as you're going, you clean that area out, so a lot of dirt and grime doesn't get in there, because that can scratch your stanchion as well. Excuse me. Need a little bit of coffee. Okay, awesome. Next question. Does your bivy bag undergo condensation on the inside? Occasionally it does. So let's talk a little bit about bivy condensation. So when condensation develops on a bivy sack, it develops on the inside of the bivy sack. So the layer, that's between the outside of your bivy sack and the sleeping bag. And the reason it does this is because the problem is moisture from the inside of the bag. So either heat that your body releases, or, if your clothes are a little damp that you're wearing to bed, or, something like that, the moisture condenses on the inside of the farthest out layer of fabric. Because that layer of fabric cools faster because of the radiation heat loss to the sky, especially on clear nights. So when it's clear, it's colder because you don't have that cloud layer insulating the earth and the ground and the air that's below the cloud layer. So when it's clear and it's a colder night, you're going to have that happening a lot more because your body heat is warm and it's a colder night. And so that can cause that condensation on the inside of the bivy sack. It reaches the dew point more quickly than the other surfaces around it, that bivy layer, and then water vapor condenses on that cooler surface. So the main kind of ingredients for getting condensation on your bivy is if the bivy material is lying right on top of your sleeping bag with a really slick surface. So a few things that you can do about that. You can get a bivy sack that has a pole or a hoop so that your bivy sack doesn't actually contact your sleeping bag. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit more weight. I don't personally do that because I want to be super lightweight, especially for racing, but even for touring, I just don't have a lot of space on my bike because I'm small. I don't have a lot of capacity, so I don't do that, but that is something you could do to keep the condensation off your bivy. Another thing you could do is to, and again, this is more for touring than for racing, but you could put a tarp up, and having that tarp, over your bivy, not super high, but a little ways over your bivy, that's going to make that condensation layer happen on the inside of the tarp instead of the inside of the bivy. And so you're not going to get your sleeping bag wet because of that condensation. So you could do tarp plus bivy. The bivy, so a couple weeks ago, I was on a bikepacking trip with my friend Lee on the Olympic Peninsula, and we used a tarp because it's really rainy there, but I also use my bivy because it's a little bit of a warm layer, and I was just using an ultralight down quilt, so I had the bivy as well to keep me a little bit warmer. But with the tarp up above me, we had a little bit of condensation on the tarp. We had some rain on the outside of the tarp, but my bivy stayed dry. My sleeping bag stayed dry, so that was nice. The other thing that sometimes I do when I don't have a tarp is I try to camp underneath like the boughs of a tree, so that that tree will be the layer above my bivy, and hopefully will, you know, pick up a little bit of that condensation and save it from my bivy. That can also kind of backfire if, you know, if the tree's wet and the tree can release water on top of you. I've had that happen before. That was not very fun. So definitely make sure it's not a place where the tree's wet and it's going to essentially rain on you. But that can be something that can work as well for, you know, preventing that condensation on your bivy. Another thing that's super simple that you can do is just not breathe inside your bivy sack and inside your sleeping bag. It doesn't always necessarily stop condensation if those other factors are also in play, but it's definitely something that will cause condensation if you are breathing inside of your bivy. So what I like to do, even if it's really cold, is sleep with a little, you know, if it's cold and I have my sleeping bag hood and my bivy hood over my head, I make sure that when I'm snugging down the cord, that I just keep a little hole, and I literally put it just like right where my face is, and so I'm not breathing into the bivy. If it's really cold, what I sometimes do is I have my hat over my eyes, and then I pull a buff up over my face, so basically just my nose and mouth are sticking out. But that does definitely help with condensation, is to just not breathe inside of your bivy. I think that's all that I can think of at this moment about bivvies and condensation. So we will move on. Let's see. Oh, I lost my screenshots. Here they are. Okay. How to best transport a tent on your bike? Okay. So, kind of is personal preference, and a lot of it is going to depend on how you have your bikepacking bag set up, and if you're carrying a backpack, and you know, how tall you are and how much capacity you have for carrying stuff on your bike. I typically don't bikepack with a tent, mostly for the reason that, you know, I'm small and I don't have a lot of carrying capacity, and a tent would take up a lot of space. Also because I am just a minimalist and I don't like walls, and so I just prefer to sleep with a bivy all the time, actually. I do take a tent if I'm in an area where there are going to be a lot of bugs, and I know that, or there's going to be a lot of rain, and I know that, and I'm not racing. So obviously a tarp does not shield you from bugs. Tent could shield you from bugs and rain. I've never raced with a tent, but I have taken one touring where I know that there's going to be rain and bugs. So the best place to carry it is the best place that it fits, kind of depending on how heavy it is. If it's super light, you can carry it in your handlebar roll bag. If you have more capacity in the rear, you can carry it on, you know, in the bag that is on your seat post. If it's a heavier tent, I'd recommend carrying it somewhere on the frame, within the frame. So in the triangle of the frame, either in a frame bag, or when I carried one on my Puerto Rico expedition, I just used Volet ski straps to essentially bungee the tent to my seat tube of my bike. So I had it in the triangle, bungee to the seat tube. I've also seen people do that on the downside of the down tube, but if you do that, make sure that you have the tent in a dry bag that's pretty robust. Otherwise, it's going to get shredded on the bottom of your down tube. So just, you know, make sure that it's protected wherever you put it. So, you know, heavier things, you want to be lower on the bike, more in the frame. If lighter, you can put it on the front or on the rear. If it's light, you can also put it in a backpack. So for me, I don't like to carry heavy things on my back. So if I am wearing a backpack, I will put things that are bulky but pretty light on my back. The tent that I do have is a Nemo Hornet 2-person tent. It's more like a me and Cody, my dog, tent. It's not very big, but it's only about 2 pounds, but it's, you know, it's bulky because it's a tent. So when I do carry that, sometimes I will put that in my backpack. Okay. Do you treat encounters with wildlife like encounters backpacking? Yeah, I would say so. I haven't backpacked in a long time, but generally, I mean, bikepacking is just like backpacking, only you're on a bike instead of on foot. I have had wildlife encounters on my bike. I encountered a mountain lion when I was riding at night one time, and I got off of my bike and I just stood behind my bike and put my bike in between me and the mountain lion, kind of just like held it up and made myself look as big as possible. And the cat decided it didn't want anything to do with me, and it walked away. And typically, wildlife does not want anything to do with you. yeah, so I don't worry too much about it. I've seen tons of bears. I've seen grizzly bears up in Alaska and the Yukon. I've seen lots of black bears, Alaska and the Yukon as well. And every bear that I've seen, it's usually I just see their butt as they're running away from me. So when I know that I'm in bear country, it's a little different on a bike because when you're going downhill, obviously you're going faster. So, you are more likely to surprise like a bear or something, another, creature on the trail when you're ripping downhill on your bike. So what I do when I know that I'm in bear country on my bike and I'm going downhill or even uphill fast is when I know that I'm going around a corner where you can't really see the trail in front of you. And I do this for humans as well, is I'll just, sing or yodel, or I'll let out a hoot, or, hoo-wee, and just so that anything on the trail knows that I'm coming. And, typically if I'm making sounds, the only part of wildlife I see is their butt as they're running away. In terms of camping, yeah, backpacking, bikepacking, same thing. If you do a bear hang, do a good job. I do use an ursack when I'm in bear country bikepacking. I just did a race in Lake Tahoe, and that place is just crawling with bears. And so I did bring an ursack, and I stuck my food in it and just tied it to a tree when I was sleeping. Most of the time when I'm racing, I don't do anything like that because I don't sleep that long. I'm only, on the ground sleeping for 3-4 hours a night. And so I just leave everything on my bike and I stand it up with my rear wheel kind of leaning against the tree. So the frame itself is not against the tree and little critters can't just, easily crawl up and get into it. But yeah, it's a comfort level thing. It's a personal risk level thing. And, personally, I grew up camping. I grew up in the woods in Minnesota, and I grew up with wildlife in the woods. And so, I'm obviously things could happen that wouldn't be very pleasant, but I just have a really high comfort level with camping because I've been doing it my whole life. So totally personal preference. If you're not as comfortable with camping and the potential of wildlife encounters, by all means, get an ursack. They're awesome. Do a really good bear hang. I like ursacks because you don't actually have to do a bear hang. The fabric itself is bear proof, so you put all your food in the ursack and then you tie it up. You tie up the top and you can just tie it well around a big tree so that a bear can't carry it away. And even if the bear finds it and it's, playing volleyball with it all night long, it's not going to get it off the tree. So that would be my recommendation if you do want to hang your food. Little critters, I feel like are more of a concern than bears. But yeah, again, just kind of personal preference. Next question. Route planning, digital or analog? Ooh, I like that one. Personally, I use both. My expedition in Alaska, that was bikepacking and pack rafting, my teammate and I basically planned that entire route using the Alaska Gazetteer. And then, we brought in some technology later on. For tech tools, I use Gaia GPS. I've been using that since 2013 or 2014. And I use the National Geographic topo layer if that's available in the area that I'm traveling. A lot of times it's not. So then I just use the satellite topo layer on Gaia, which gives me both satellite imagery and topo lines. So I can plan routes that way. I use Google Earth quite a bit, especially in areas that aren't known, when I'm not on an established route and I'm kind of forging my own path as I go. I use a lot of Google Earth. I talk to locals a lot. A teammate and I did an expedition in Peru where we were scouting out a new route across the Peruvian Andes, and a lot of it was just talking to locals and pointing to things that looked like trails up on the mountain and asking if that's passable or where it goes. I definitely use paper maps, topo maps. When I'm planning, I don't always take them with me. Sometimes I will. Sometimes I'll take pictures of them. Sometimes I'll rip off little pieces of them. But again, space, weight, things like that. So you just kind of have to, use the resources that you have with the capacity you have for packing. So I use all of those sources. I do love talking to people on the ground. Before I did my Pakistan expedition, I've got a good friend, a female mountain biker in Islamabad, who was a really great resource for me and hooked me up with a lot of other people on the ground in Pakistan. And, I was able to learn a lot about potential routes that way. So yeah, all those things. Do I bike pack much without racing? Yes, lots. I have been a little more focused on ultra racing over the past couple of years because, I don't know, it's fun and I've been into it. But I do bike pack a lot. Most of my bike packing actually has been not in the US. I've done usually one major international like expedition or expedition style trip a year since 2015. A couple of years I've done 2. And those trips are typically a month or more, between 1 and 3 months long. And that's, always bikepacking and sometimes combined with other things like pack rafting. But yeah, I've done more bikepacking in the US in the last few years, but before that it was more international. But yes, I do love bikepacking and bike touring as well as racing. It's fun to go more slowly. Let's see. Next question. Choosing a bike for bikepacking, route dependent. Yes. So a lot of people ask me, what is a bikepacking bike? And my answer is always the bike that you take bikepacking. You can bikepack on any bike. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter how old it is, how heavy it is, if it's full suspension, no suspension, as long as it has like wheels and pedals and a seat and some handlebars, like it's a bikepacking bike. If you do have a choice, like personally, I definitely pick the bike I'm going to bikepack on based on the route for sure. So I love bikepacking on my full suspension trail bike. I've set it up really well so that it carries the weight really well, really evenly, and I love riding it. But I've also loved bikepacking on routes where, there's not as much like technical or rough single track, and there's more like gravel roads or fire roads or smoother single track, and, full suspension isn't really necessary. And I want something where I can just kind of go faster on those like gravel and 4-wheel drive roads. So then I'll ride a hardtail. I have done some bikepacking in the winter, and also on sand. And so for those trips, I take a fat bike. So yeah, route dependent for sure. And also just, personal preference. Next question, hot weather or cold is more difficult? That is a really good question. Again, I think personal preference. I personally am more like afraid of really cold temperatures. My feet get really cold. I have a really hard time with temperature regulation in my feet. And so that's always something that I have to think about. And that's actually why I haven't gotten into winter ultra racing, is because my feet get really cold, and that's kind of scary. So for me, the cold is a little bit harder. Yeah, but I mean, that being said, I'm from Minnesota. I grew up in a really cold place. I've done a lot of stuff in the winter. I've done a lot of like snow cave camping with skiing, done a lot of winter riding, and some winter bikepacking, and totally possible. You just got to bring a lot more stuff and just really, be a lot more mindful of taking care of yourself. Hot weather for me is not as difficult. It's maybe kind of uncomfortable sometimes, but yeah, you don't have the hypothermia risk. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. They both have their factors. Personally for me, cold is more difficult. However, I tend to plan lots of my expeditions in cold places, which is kind of funny. I don't know why I do that. I gotta stop that. Okay. Ooh, here's a good one. Where do I find groups or people to go with? Where do I start? It's a super good question. So, this might sound like a really kind of funny answer, but one of my girlfriends recently contacted me with the same question, and she's been racing for quite a while. She likes to do single day endurance races, and she has started bikepacking, and she's done a little bit of bikepacking with friends and once on her own, and she wants to get more comfortable with bikepacking on her own. And so my recommendation for her was to go and try an ultra race. And that might sound crazy, to get into bikepacking by doing an ultra race. But the great thing about that is that there are a lot of people out on the course. So even though you're alone and you're racing by yourself, typically, you're going to run into people out there. You're going to pass someone at a resupply and stop and talk to them. Someone's going to pass you, stop and talk to them. And when you're camping, you always know that there are people camping, probably relatively nearby, or at least on the same course. So for people just getting into bikepacking, who don't have people to go with and are still wanting to give it a try anyway, go seek out an ultra race. And, you don't, when you're ultra racing, you don't have to, race per se. You don't have to, ride through the night and sleep deprive, and you don't have to, push yourself super hard. You can just go out there and ride all day long and have fun on your bike, and then get a good night's sleep and then keep going. So there's definitely some ultra races that I've entered just because of that. I want to use them for training or fun or, base miles, and I want to see my friends, and I'm not really treating them like races at all. So that might be a good way to get into it. In terms of finding, the other thing about finding people is you meet really great people in ultra races. So some of my favorite riding buddies and bikepacking buddies now I've met in ultra races. So that's a good way to meet people in that community. Otherwise, Facebook groups, there will typically be groups, like I know there's one about bikepacking Colorado. There's probably ones for other states as well. There's just bikepacking Facebook groups in general. I'm not the biggest fan of Facebook, but the groups are pretty useful. So if you can get past all of the BS that's on the Facebooks these days and find some of those bikepacking groups, it's a good way to find people to go with. Also, just kind of keep your ear open in the community. A lot of times, people like me will run clinics and camps, and I actually had 2 set up for this year, obviously canceled them because of COVID, but that's a good way to meet people as well. So yeah, just kind of keeping up with people that do it a lot and seeing if they're ever putting on any camps or clinics or group rides or anything like that. And yeah, lots of places to find people. Okay, next screenshot. All right. Somebody asks, hi, can I ask if merino wool undies work for bikepacking multi-day with no padding? Tips for preventing sores there and in hands. Washing helps, I think, but how to do it in the wilderness? Pretty cold situation. This person lives in the UK. Any soaps or moisturizer or powder? Is talcum powder any use? Okay, good questions. Lots of questions there. Okay, so first question. Can I ask if merino wool undies work for bikepacking multi-day with no padding? Yes, they do. I personally do not use anything typically under my little baggy bike shorts. I just have a couple really comfy pairs of pretty lightweight little baggy shorts, and I literally wear nothing underneath them. I don't know a lot of people that do that. I love it. I've been doing it for years. My good friend Lee, who I was just bikepacking with, she does exactly what you just asked. So she wears merino wool undies under her bike shorts all the time, whether that's, day rides, races, bikepacking trips, multi-day stuff. That's her jam. That's exactly what she does. And she really likes it, and she has had no problems with it. I have recently kind of decided to give that a try, mostly because on our last bikepacking trip, there were some instances where I needed to wear my rain pants because it was pouring rain, and my rain pants don't really fit super well over my baggies. And so I ended up just wearing my rain pants with nothing underneath them, and rain pants are kind of plasticky, and it just didn't feel very good. So what I think I'm going to do in the future on those types of trips where I know that I might need to wear rain pants is bring a pair of merino wool boxers or undies to put on underneath the rain pants. So yes, that definitely works. Tips for preventing sores. Okay, saddle sores and butt hygiene. Super, super, super important when you're touring or racing. This is something that I always make time for, even if I'm in a race and I'm trying to go really fast. So what I do is I wash my nether regions every evening before I crawl into my bivy. And if I'm camping next to a creek, I just, wash it in the creek. And yeah, it's a little chilly, but it's not like I'm getting all the way in the creek. And then I make sure that I dry it. If I don't have a creek, I do carry usually a small supply of, a few wet wipes so that I can clean with a wet wipe. And then I use something that I affectionately call Dave Wick's butt potion. And it was something that was taught to me by my friend Dave Wicks, who is a Kiwi, and I met him in the Arizona Trail Race. And so his butt potion is this mixture. So it is 4 different things, and it's equal parts of all of these things. And the things are antibiotic ointment, so double or triple antibiotic ointment, foot fungus cream, pimple cream, and toothache gel. So the way that I do this is, when I'm racing, I squeeze all these things into a little Ziploc bag, and then I mash it all together and I put it in my, wherever, somewhere in my kit, my first aid kit usually. And then at night, it's kind of nasty, but just reach my hand inside the bag and I just get a little bit, and then I just put it all over my, saddle area essentially. And then I go to bed. And this definitely has been really instrumental in keeping my butt happy and keeping saddle sores away. On occasion, I will do it during the day. I don't ever use chamois cream because I don't use chamois. But occasionally, if I'm feeling a little bit raw in that area, I will use that mixture during the day as well. And it's actually been, knock on wood here, but it's actually been quite a while since I've had issues, ever since using that butt potion and making sure to wash every night. Lee, my friend I was talking about earlier with the merino shorts, she uses a different thing. She uses diaper rash cream. And I gave that a try on our last bikepacking trip together, and that worked really well too. So that's another thing that you could try. Soaps, moisturizer, powder, nope. Dave Wick's butt potion, diaper rash cream, yeah. Yeah, and then, if it's cold, you're in the wilderness, like, yeah, kind of sucks, but it's important. Like, that is definitely one thing I never skip, is washing my dirty belows in after a long day in the saddle. Also, another thing is, when I stopped wearing chamois, I stopped getting, saddle sores and rubs. Chamois definitely trap bacteria, and they definitely just trap moisture in there. And one of the keys to not getting saddle sores is having a lot of good airflow down there throughout the day. So that's why I like to wear nothing underneath my baggies, because when I'm going downhill and I stand up, like, I like to get the breeze going through there and dry everything out. So I don't wear chamois. I haven't for a long time, and that's a reason why. The other thing that I like to do, especially in humid areas like the Olympic Peninsula, is when I'm doing a long hike-a-bike, I drop my pants. Now, you can't do this if it's a crowded trail, obviously, but if it's a longer hike-a-bike, or if I just am feeling a little bit like, humid in that area and I want to air it out, I will just get off my bike and walk, and I just like roll my shorts down to like mid-thigh level, and I'll just hang my butt out and I'll walk my bike. Yeah, I don't bike pack in a lot of areas where there's a lot of people, but I definitely was caught by a couple of AZT thru hikers when I was doing this during the race. They just pretty much laughed at me, and they're like, yep, we do that too. So yeah, keeping it dry during the day, washing it at night, and then using that butt potion. Those are my keys for a happy hoo-ha, or happy bum. Okay, next question. This is a question that was related to my Y-Cycles Titanium Hardtail S7 build. He says, what are the little handles in the middle of the bar? Is that to hang a pack or another handrest? It is another handrest. So they're bar ends that typically go on the end of the bar, but I just slide them in to make them bar ends. And yep, that's just another hand position. When I'm on long rides or races where there's a lot of road, like gravel or, smoother four-wheel drive road, and I want another position for my hands, or if I'm trying to go fast and I want to hammer and be aerodynamic, I just put my hands on those bars in the front and just lean on in. So kind of like a little like mini baby aero bar setup. So that's what that's for. Okay. What else we got? Okay, so this is a good one. This is a long, good message from a friend on Facebook. So he says, my biggest struggle is I can't seem to really dial in the food. He says, I backpacked thousands of miles and spent months in the woods, and I always bring legit food, usually pasta for dinner every night, but I always bring dried noodles with some sort of cured meat and veggies that can last a week without being refrigerated, and cheese to mix in as a sauce. For lunch, he uses bars and gorp and oatmeal for breakfast. Says, that being said, I'm burning about 8 times the calories on a bike, and of the 2 3-day trips I did for a gear test run, I was hungry the whole time. Not really sure how I can shove 7,000 calories down my throat in a day when fast food isn't available. I feel it's sustainable to be calorie deficient for a 3 or 4-day trip, but we're planning 45 days for my next trip with 38 days of riding. I can't sustain the lack of calories for that long. Yeah, totally. Okay. So, this is what I do in those situations, because I've been on a lot of long-term expedition-style bikepacking trips. I get fat before I go. That's literally my biggest kind of hack for that. And it can be kind of hard because, if you're on your bike a lot and you're training for a long ride, it can be hard to actually put weight on. But my very first expedition in Guatemala, when I was riding volcanoes on my fat bike, I came back from that trip emaciated. And the reason for that is because I was at my racing weight, which is basically like the lowest weight. We did this expedition right in the middle of racing season. So I was pretty fit and slim. And I also got sick during the trip because food poisoning happens in countries where you're not used to the cuisine, or there's contamination in the water or the food, whatever. So, combination of riding all day long. This trip was 3 weeks and we were on our bikes pretty much every day. Riding all day long, plus going into it, pretty slim, and then getting sick. I looked disgusting when I finished that trip. So what I do now is I make sure that before I go out on a long biking trip, I put on, maybe like 5 extra pounds or so. Now I'm 5'2", and my typical weight is 120-ish pounds, 120, 123 pounds, kind of depending on the time of year and what I'm doing. So I'm pretty small. So 5 pounds for me, might be 10 pounds for somebody who's a lot bigger than I am. So kind of use your best judgment. Obviously, it's a delicate balance because if you're like super heavy, it's going to be harder to pedal that much weight. But if you're at your like regular super fit biker weight, like you're probably going to come out of that trip pretty skinny. So I would definitely recommend putting on some weight before you go. The other thing that I would do, so when I'm touring or bikepacking and not racing, I definitely try to bring legit food. I've got a teeny tiny stove with like a cup, and I like to do pasta as well. I'll do like little elbow pastas, and I will bring same thing, same exact thing that you said: cured meat, veggies that can last for sure, hard cheese. Lee and I each had a block of Parmesan on our last bikepacking trip, and that lasts forever. Salami, sausages, those types of things. So I am a huge proponent of real food, and as whole of foods as you can get, as complete of a diet as you can get, obviously is the best situation. You can't always get that. So one reason that I don't follow a specific diet when I'm here in the US is because I do so much international riding in a lot of really remote places where I can't eat a specific food. You just kind of have to eat what's there, and sometimes there's not a lot of food there and there aren't a lot of choices. So I went like 2 weeks on my Peru expedition where pretty much the only thing I ate was quinoa, and that's just because that's what there was. And so, for me, I think it's important that I keep my body like used to running on anything that it can run on. I do eat a lot of fast food when I'm racing because sometimes that's all there is. Sometimes it's the only thing open at 2 a.m. when I roll through a resupply point. Gas station food, same thing. Like, I don't love it, but when I'm racing, I do rely on it quite a bit. Simply because I'm trying to go fast, and sometimes it's the only thing to do. When I'm touring, I definitely try to hit grocery stores, but at the end of the day, like, the route you plan just might not be ideal for like full-on legit grocery store resupplies. So, you just do the best you can with what you have. I try to aim to eat around 250 to 300 calories per hour when I'm moving. If it's a long trip, what happens to me is my body kind of adapts, and then it doesn't need so much anymore. And so on my expeditions, I will plan to be carrying a lot more food for maybe the first like week or so, 5 to 7 days. And then after that, I'll actually be able to taper it off a little bit because my body just becomes more efficient. So, but yeah, like if you're on a long bikepacking trip, especially if you're, a bigger person who needs more calories to sustain yourself, like you can only put in so many calories a day when you're riding your bike all day. So that is a factor. And I would just gain a little bit of weight before you go into that trip so that you're not emaciated when you come out. Okay, what else we got here? I think we're almost done. Okay. Last question here comes from my buddy Nate, who loves to ask me weird questions. I love you, buddy. And he says, where do I poop if I'm in my sleeping bag and unwilling to get out of my sleeping bag? Well, buddy, and anyone else with that question, I will say you probably need to institute rule number 5, which is HTFU, and just get out of your bag. Otherwise, you're going to have a nasty-ass bag, literally. Okay, guys, thanks for the questions. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you come up with any more, go ahead and send them to me. I'll do another video at some point. I'm headed off to a race. I'm racing Pinions and Pines out of Flagstaff. Next weekend, it's a 300-mile race. I'll be on track later, so you can follow along. I'll post that link. In the meantime, get out and ride your bikes. Have fun. Play with some bikepacking setups. And, yeah, have a great rest of your day.